Good evening and welcome to the opening event of Granite Noir 2021. I'm Fiona Stalker. I'm a journalist and presenter at BBC Scotland. This is kind of bizarre, isn't it? But it won't be after a few minutes. I have been privileged to be part of Granite Noir since it started, since its beginnings, and my goodness, how it's grown over the years. We're doing things a little differently this year. Who could have foreseen this a year ago? In a digital format. We're in the midst of a global pandemic and lockdown, but the show will go on, I promise you. All three Aberdeen performing arts venues have been closed since last March. Can you believe that? Seems a lifetime ago. But it was never in any doubt whatsoever that there would be Granite Noir 2021. Now, last year was the biggest and the most successful Granite Noir in its history. But I suppose the flip side of it is being like this is we get to kind of be in your living rooms and you're probably sitting on your sofa. You've maybe been home working all week. So just take a little bit of the weight off, lie back, relax, whatever you want to do. And I think I'm going to limit myself to one of these. I'm not going to tell you. In fact, I'll get to show you what Stuart and Ian are having tonight. But we've got some of the world's leading crime writers with us tonight and over the weekend. I think we're missing being in the same physical space with you, but I promise this year's festival will be as thrilling. Tonight it is my pleasure to be in conversation with two of the world's finest crime writers, Ian Rankin and Stuart MacBride. They're going to be here to discuss why stories, put simply, about cops chasing baddies will never go out of fashion in a very fickle world. Between them, they have sold millions across the globe. And I would say they're flag bearers for Tartan Noir. If you think I'm looking down at the camera, I do have some notes with me. Stuart MacBride's newest Ash Henderson thriller, I've got to say I consumed it in a day. I've got quite a busy work schedule just now, but I absolutely drank it up in a day. I'll tell you a tiny bit about it. It's called The Coffinmaker's Garden. It starts with a storm that reveals human remains buried in someone's garden. It twists and turns with lashings of dark humour. As I say, I read it in a day. And in A Song for Dark Times, Ian Rankin's most recent Rebus novel, the ex-detective speeds to the edge of Scotland to help his daughter, who's distraught that her husband's gone missing. I'm reading you the blurb, but it doesn't matter because you've got the guys in front of you. There's also a domestic drama. It's linked to a case that Siobhan and Malcolm are investigating back in the capital. So what do we have in store for you tonight? Well, whilst you sit comfortably on your sofas, Ian, Stuart and I are just going to have a chat from our sofas about their new books, about their work, about their characters, about writing in lockdown, and really anywhere where our conversations are going to go. But I promise to leave you some time for questions. And I always kind of have this, I give a warning to writers, authors who are in Aberdeen. I think you're amazing audiences, but you're a tiny bit shy. So once the first hand goes up, which I'll give you a secret, I always plant one question and then it goes crazy. But actually, we've already got some questions in. So obviously, they're a little bit less shy when we're on Zoom. So that's brilliant. So you get the chance to ask questions. I pick them up in the chat box and then Ian and Stuart will answer them. So that's basically how it's going to go. We've got an hour. So we're just going to go straight into it. So let's have a virtual welcome and let's get straight into it. Guys, I think we're going to have to tackle this head on. We're in the midst of a global pandemic. Last year, I think we were kind of reminiscing about what was happening last year. The lemon tree, there was DJs and singing and dancing and all sorts of things. We're now kind of on our sofas. Stuart, first of all, how's lockdown been for you? Let's just get this done and dusted. How's lockdown been for you?
In many ways, it's exactly the same. In that I've spent the last 16 odd years working from home. In other ways, it's hugely different because I have spent so long working from home. What I really miss are the bits that mean that I'm not working from home. Just the little treats, the going up to buy fish in Bucky, or heading down to Aberdeen to go and have a nice lunch. Those things that sort of get me out of the office. Now it's just all the office all of the time. And I'm hugely antisocial, but I kind of miss people now, which I didn't think I would.
Ian, how's lockdown been for you?
I've got a lot of stuff written. I mean, writing has become escape tunnel. It's like the Great Escape. I tunnel my way out of Camp Pandemic by writing stories that aren't about the pandemic, so I don't have to think about it while I'm actually at my desk working. But like Stuart, I mean, I'm not the most sociable of people, but I do miss holidays, foreign climes, travel, meeting fans, meeting people, meals out. I missed that more than I thought I would. For about the first 6 months, I was absolutely fine. I had my nose into a book. I was doing Song for the Dark Times, and then I started doing the Willie McIlvanney book. That kept me busy. But things are quieting down a bit, and I'm sort of slightly fingers and going, when do I get to leave this office? I mean, I'm lucky that I don't work from home. For the first 50 odd years of my life, I didn't have an office that was separate from the house. And I always had like the spare room, the laundry room, a wee cubbyhole here, there, or everywhere was where I wrote. And now I've got an actual physical 1-bedroom flat. That's my office. I leave my home, which is just over there. I can see it across the courtyard. And I commute to work every day. And that,
so psychologically, it feels like you're actually going from home. You've got that separation. You're going from home to work. Yeah,
it's like having a shed at the bottom of your garden that you can disappear into. And I think it's saved my marriage, probably.
I suppose for you guys, I don't know whether it's better equipped you for dealing with the isolation that a lot of people are facing. Stuart, do you think it's given you some sort of resilience in dealing with these times? Because most people are used to having a social interaction every single day, but you would squirrel yourself away for quite long periods of time.
Well, in the last 12 months, I've written 2 shortish novels, 2 novellas, a handful of short stories, edited a full-length manuscript, and I'm now working on another one. So, yeah, like Ian, there's that Shawshank Redemption, peeling back the poster and just digging away while nobody's looking.
Ian,
it does help.
Sorry.
It does help.
Yeah, and that fascinates me. I've actually got a colleague who's writing books at the moment, and he's going into kind of a kind of isolation. He's booked a place that he's going to literally stay in and squirrel himself away. But he's quite a young guy, so he's kind of dreading that slightly. But I suppose it's something you have to get used to. Many of us are having to get used to that isolation. Ian, let's talk about Rebus. How old is he now?
Well, it depends on how you're counting. I do not count the 5 years after I retired them the first time round.
Okay.
So I retired them at the end of Exit Music, thinking I would never write about them again. And for 5 years, I didn't. And when I brought them back, I've kind of scored those 5 years off. Now, if you do the math, the first book came out in 87 and he was already 40. So he would now be in his 70s. But I ended in his late 60s. So he can't chase suspects anymore. He's a bit like Frank Cannon on TV in the 70s, if anybody's old enough to remember that. He really can't chase a suspect anymore. He's got lots of health issues. But, you know, he's dealing with the kinds of things that we all have to deal with. To that extent, I think he's a realistic human being in that as he gets older, he gets creakier.
He'd have had his vaccine, of course, wouldn't he, by now? He'd have been in the 70s?
He'd been a high-risk group because of the COPD, so yes, he would have his vaccine by now.
But he wouldn't have had his vaccine because for him, the pandemic is another 4 years off.
So
but now we're getting into TARDIS territory.
How much did you miss him in those 5 years, Ian? How much did you miss him? I
didn't miss him at all. I really didn't miss him at all. It was only when I got an idea for a book that demanded someone like Rebus be at its centre that I thought, maybe I could bring him back. But I really hadn't missed him. I'd been enjoying writing about other characters and inventing other characters. I've got to say that just to slightly answer the point that was just made by Stuart, during last summer, having finished Song for the Dark Times, which was set in the summer of 2019, so the pandemic wasn't part of it at all. I was then asked to do a 10-minute monologue for the National Theatre of Scotland, and people had been asking me how would Rebus cope in the pandemic. So I wrote a 10-minute monologue, and it's Rebus in lockdown. It's called the Rebus Lockdown Blues, and it was eventually given to Brian Cox, the great Scottish actor, to do, and it's on YouTube. You can go and watch it. So I had that Rebus, who is in isolation in lockdown, But he's not quite the same Rebus as the Rebus even in the book that I just finished writing, because in that book, the first thing that happens is Rebus moves to a ground floor apartment because he can no longer manage stairs. But I wanted him to be trapped halfway up a flight of stairs. So in the play set during the pandemic, he's still in his second floor flat, but in reality, he's already moved by the time of the pandemic. And there will be letters from fans. We always get them. There will be letters.
Do you get people pointing out that that's not what he would have done, or that's not his mannerisms, or that's not what he'd have said? Do you get that?
Yeah, I'm sure I do, and I'm sure Stuart does as well.
Stuart, tell us about Ash Henderson. He fascinates me. I do miss Logan quite a bit, but I'm liking Ash. Tell us about Ash Henderson.
Well, Ash is my way of getting as far away from Logan as I possibly can, because Logan's a team player. He's a good guy. He's, he's more or less by the book, except when he isn't. Whereas Ash is a man of violence who cannot commit violence, or finds it very difficult to, because I gave him horrible arthritis. So he is everything that Logan isn't. He is a lone wolf. He's much more the traditional central character to a crime novel. He has a weird, he's a bit of a weirdo, and he has a sidekick, which is how traditionally crime fiction is structured. Whereas in the Logan universe, Logan is the sidekick and he works for the weirdos. So he's just exactly the opposite. It's a lovely break for me. So
if you now onwards, when you're writing, Stuart, first of all, will you have to write the pandemic into your novels? So how do you begin to look as writing in the future without reflecting that? Because we're living in a new normal, as we all know. So does that now become part of your writing, Stuart, first of all?
Nope, because the book I'm working on at the moment is set in 2022 when it'll be published. So it's not going to be out until we are, hopefully, touching wood, all vaccinated. We can all go out, we can mingle, and we can do things like that. The pandemic has happened, and it's not sort of brushed under the rug, but I am not writing a book that is set in pandemic times because it's not coming out in pandemic times.
Ian, do you have to take into account the kind of new normal that we're living in when you're writing now?
I think if the next book I write is set in 2021 or 2022, obviously yes, there will be mentions along the way. It kind of depends on how long the tail of the pandemic is, how long we're going around all wearing masks. The people in the cops in offices, are they going to be wearing masks in the office? Are they going to be socially distancing? How are they going to do interviews? All the rest of it. Hopefully we'll find all of that out in the fullness of time before I start writing the next book. I'm not planning to write another crime novel probably until 2022, 23. So I've got a little bit of time for it all to settle. And I can always fall back on the what the scoundrel would do, which is to set my books in the past, and just because that is much easier, isn't it? It's much easier. I mean, Stuart and I have given ourselves a rug to beat our own backs with by setting up in the present day, when you've got to take on board all the technology, the mobile phones, the CCTV, all the tech that's available to the police force that we know nothing about. Precious little about, and it keeps changing from month to month. If we'd set our books in the 60s or 70s, how lovely.
So therefore your research doesn't stop. That must be exhausting, because you will get people pointing out that that's not authentic, Stuart. So I presume you're constantly having to research.
Well, Police Scotland keep changing the bleeding ballpark as well, don't they? Flippin' heck. I can't write about Aberdeen for a good year or 2 years. Because they're getting rid of Grampian Police Headquarters finally.
Queen Street,
and it's all being broken up into different buildings in different places. So to write convincingly about any of them, I'm going to have to actually be able to go to these places and see what they're like. So I think...
Make it up. You could just make it up, Stuart.
That's why I have Oldcastle. I just make all of it up.
So tell us about Oldcastle. Where is Oldcastle?
Oldcastle is sort of halfway between Dundee and Aberdeen.
So corporate.
It's more from Montrose-ish.
Okay.
But Montrose still exists in my world. So
okay.
And it is inland from Montrose on a river that doesn't exist.
Okay. Ian, do you feel that pressure to constantly having to be authentic about your writing, constantly having to research?
Oh yeah, I mean, I knew that A Song for the Dark Times was going to be set up north. I wanted to get Rebus out of his comfort zone, and I wanted to reconnect him with his daughter, who for years has lived in Tongue, up on the north coast. And so I started writing the book and did most of the first draft, and then as my way of working, then did the research. And I drove up to Tongue and looked around me and thought, no, this won't do. It's slightly too big and too bustling. It's got too much going on. There's too much commerce. There's too much this, too much that. So I basically got back in the car and drove and got to a wee place called Betty Hill and thought, this is much closer to the thing I want. But then I thought, I don't really want to call it Betty Hill. So I came up with the name Never, which is the local river that runs through there. And that became my fictional village / hamlet in A Song for the Dark Times. But I think it's fairly recognisably mostly Betty Hill to those who know that part of the world. But it was funny kind of going up to Tongue, and in my memory of Tongue, it would just be perfect for my needs. And when I got there, I thought, no, it's got a police station, it's got a hotel, it's got this, it's got that. And I thought, I want my place to be smaller, more confined. So it didn't quite do. But I did all the research. I was lucky. I did that trip in February last year and got back to Edinburgh and thought, right, now I can start the final draft, the third draft. And then the lockdown happened. So the one piece of research that I physically couldn't manage, because I wasn't allowed to go more than 5 miles from home, I couldn't go to Edinburgh Airport to check out where the car rental desks are and how you go about renting a car and where the car rental cars are kept. That is completely fictitious in my book. And I'd left it to the end of the research thinking it's the easiest thing to do. I'll jump on a tram and go to the airport and walk about and find out where the car rental places are. So that bit is completely made up. And that's a bit I'm going to get letters about, I'm sure. Because the rest of it is meticulously researched.
You were fairly non-committable about where the car rental place is. I mean, you do gloss over it.
Over there, somewhere in the car park.
There's cars and people hiding cars. Look, they have wheelie cases. Look, it's authentic.
Let's talk about the... Sorry, Stuart, on you go.
I have to ask, the opening sequence, the prologue for Song for the Dark Times, still available from all good bookshops.
I know.
After months and months and sodding months.
Not all sold yet.
Rebus moves from a bigger place into a smaller place, has to get rid of lots of his books and his records. Where did the inspiration for that come from? You can't see Fiona. Yeah. Come and wave.
It's getting weird.
I married a ghost. Look, see, she just
you're suddenly
come out the cat's eye. That's incredible.
It's like Rent a Ghost. That's how we live here.
Such a strange thing, that effect. You've got that green screen effect. That's so weird.
Beautiful. That's actual size.
Behind me as well. Yeah. I've actually got the washing hanging up, and that's just a green screen. Well, I mean, no, as you know, Stuart, I'd just done it myself, hadn't I? I just downsized from a big house, Cafferty's house from earlier in the series, to an apartment, basically in the part of town where Cafferty lives. Again, I'm following the guy around. The villain in my books, I'm following him around Edinburgh. Every time he moves, I move. And I'd had to get rid of half the books, half the CDs, half the DVDs.
What did you do with your music? Did you actually throw it out?
No, God, no. It went to charity shops. Pretty much everything went to charity shops of Edinburgh. And I found myself in that weird situation of walking into an Oxfam shop and going, oh, they've got that. Oh, no, I gave them that.
Did you rebuy your own stuff?
I nearly did. I mean, the Oxfam shop did say to me, do you want to buy that? I went, you know what, I'm tempted. It's awfully dear. Did I really give you that for nothing? But yeah, it's cathartic. And during the first lockdown, the next thing I did was to actually alphabetize my LPs, which I have never done in my life. So I spent a half a week, and the CDs actually. So the LPs and the CDs, not the books. The books are still scattergun approach. But yeah.
Okay, here's a question. Did you do it by the band's name or the song name?
No, people have said that. Did you do it by T for this? So the Beatles would be under T. No, that madness lies. In fact, they'd be under M. But I did do it as kind of mostly rock, then all the jazz together alphabetically, then, soundtracks and classical. Folk and rock and pop are all in together. It works. I mean, I can lay my hands on my Doctor of Madness LPs just like that.
I'm glad. We've gone down a rabbit hole. Now, it's the title of the event, the Police Procedural is Dead, Long Live the Police Procedural. And this fascinates me, is in a fickle society, why does crime writing have this massive endurance, but not just endurance, this growing army of fans? Stuart, first of all, why? Why?
Because it's the best genre in the world.
Okay, fine.
It's a really easy one to answer. People who read crime fiction are the most intelligent readers in the world. And people who write crime fiction are amongst the sexiest people ever to walk the planet.
It always gets back to that. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think any of us can argue with any of those points, can we?
Rest your case.
Well, to be more serious, ever since we lived in caves, we've been telling ourselves stories about the things that society are scared of. And that's what crime fiction does. It still does it today. If you look at the trends that go through crime fiction, it tends to be the things that society is afraid of are the things that crime writers write about. That these are the things that we explore. It's not only incredibly contemporary; it stretches way back into the prehistory of our species. That's dull.
I think it's fascinating, and I know a lot of people in times of severe stress find their comfort in crime writing, and I find that really interesting. That it's almost a comfort zone for people. Ian, why do you think it's got this enduring appeal?
Well, let's break it down a little bit, because we're talking about, this was a theme that I'd been talking about with the organisers of the festival.
Yeah.
About the fact that the police detective as the main character in crime fiction seems to be disappearing fairly quickly. The kind of series character seems to be less popular than they were, or fewer writers are doing it than did it previously. And what we're getting now is a lot of psychological thrillers, domestic noir, standalones, etc., and fewer, I think, of the kind of actual cop. And I'd started to wonder if that was part of people starting to realise that the cops aren't always the good guys. We've certainly seen it in the States. Crime writers in the States, the US, are now being asked by readers, look, we're looking at Black Lives Matter. We're looking at cops beating the living daylights out of black people and killing them. How can you justify making the uniformed cops the good people in your books? And it's an awkward question. It's an interesting question, but it's an awkward question. And I think we've got to come up with a defense for that. And, I'm lucky in a way that Rebus is no longer a cop. But also most of the cops that I meet, and I'm sure Stuart's the same, we tend to meet the good cops.
Yeah.
You wouldn't meet the bad cops because the bad cops aren't going to want to talk to you.
So is it becoming less kind of black and white then, in terms of more nuanced about how the police are portrayed in crime novels then, Stuart?
Well, it's also, I know that there are bad apples in the UK, if we want to put it that way, because as Ian says, both he and I know lots of police officers who would never do any of the things that we see in the media. Whereas in the US, I think the FBI have been warning for years that white supremacists have been infiltrating US police forces. And that to me doesn't say stop writing about police officers in the US. That says to me there's a really strong basis for a plot for a crime novel. Because that's what crime fiction does. It just, people are now afraid of the police in America because they can tear gas you, they can kneel on your throat, they can shove you over when you're a 72-year-old man, so you crack your skull open. These are the things that society are now becoming afraid of, and it's really, really quite sickening that that's the people that we look to protect us are now the people that so many people have to be afraid of.
And do you think, Ian, that's going to change how people write then, how crime writers write? Is that going to change then? The way the society is looking at police and law enforcement. Ian, do you think that that's going to change how crime writers are going to write then?
I don't know. I think, crime writers write what they want to write. A younger generation have come along who want to write thrillers or twisty plots with unreliable narrators and no police involved at all or hardly at all, kind of psychological thrillers. if that's what you want to write, that's what you write. I like my police detective as a character, mostly because he or she is a useful means of looking at every level of society from the top to the bottom, because they've got a backstage pass. Rebus and Siobhan Clarke and Malcolm Fox and the rest can be talking to the politicians and the bureaucrats and the CEOs and the dispossessed and the disenfranchised. So I can actually look at society from top to bottom using one character in a way that, isn't available with many characters, many types of character in fiction. So that's what I like about it, is the fact it gives me that depth and breadth for the kinds of books I want to write. And I think my books they're not always, but they can be political. And I think it's useful to have someone like Rebus there to be my spokesperson and to do the digging on my behalf and also on readers' behalf. I mean, by the way, the stuff that Stuart was talking about can happen here as well. I mean, we saw it in Kirkcaldy and Fife with Sheikh Bayou that police managed to kill an unarmed black guy a few years ago, and there's an investigation now of what looked clearly like a bit of a cover-up. So the potential is there for us to write these books also in the UK. I mean, there are stories in the media regularly about serving police officers who've sexually assaulted people, etc., who've coerced them, who've manipulated them in some way. All those stories are available to us if we want to do it.
Stuart, in Coffinmaker's Garden, you write a scene where a woman, I think it's at a book club, is ranting about how people can enjoy a book that's about the murder of children. Do people say that to you, or do you question that yourself? I find that fascinating. Well,
if you can remember at the very start of that scene, the Ash comes into the book club.
Yeah.
And sees that it is a very dark cover with a crumbling warehouse on it, and the author's name picked out in big yellow capitals.
Oh, he's leaving. Okay. Well, just chat. It's okay. So he'll be back. It's fine. He's coming back.
Left his granny shawl in the back of the chair there. If everybody
I know. It's nice though. Oh, he's back.
Yeah, but it's disappearing into your green screen. There you go. That's better.
Granite. That's your first book.
And then a big chunk of the complaints that are then raised by the members of the book club are things that were said about this book. So, for example, somebody calls it sickeningly, cynically offensive. And that was my review from the Glasgow Herald. Because, so yeah. So I proceed to have a lot of fun with that, because that's set on Butte. Because obviously Ian and I went to Butte Noir last year, and that formed part of the research for the book. Was that not last year?
No.
Was it the year before?
Yeah.
Because you've been back many times to do your plumbing.
I know. Oh, I meant to wear my T-shirt. I went to wear my Ian Rankin plumbing T-shirt tonight. I forgot.
See?
Okay. Talking about festivals, and this interests me a lot. And we were speaking earlier on, and we had a chat with the chief exec of Aberdeen Performing Arts, who's behind the whole Granite Noir thing. There's a couple of book festivals on tonight. There's this one, and there's one in Paisley. Now, at book festivals they were just smashing it out the park in Scotland, and they were thriving. What has the pandemic done to book festivals? And I think there's the fact that people can join from anywhere, and there are people all over the world watching this tonight. But then you lose the other side of things. You lose the income, and you lose the kind of closeness of being in an event like that. Stuart, what do you think this has done to book festivals in Scotland?
I don't think we're going to find out till next year. The Edinburgh Book Festival is moving mostly online. With some events happening at the art school, and I have spoken to several people who are thinking that's just how it's going to be going forward, because it's so much cheaper than to take over Charlotte Square and put up all the tents. And I would hate to think that that's true, because the book festival in Edinburgh is just it's a tent pole that a lot of culture hangs off of, and I think I'm hoping what will happen is that a lot of people will now be able to attend book festivals that couldn't before, because, for example, Granite Noir, it's free, it's available on the internet, you can watch it anywhere in the world. maybe that means that next year, if we can go back to being a physical festival again, more people will come because they have seen what a book festival can be like, and they can turn up. And I really, really hope they do, because I would hate to think that this is it for book festivals from now on. This is a good way to go, but it's not ideal.
Yeah. Well, it's essential at the moment, isn't it? Ian, I suppose there are two sides to it, isn't there? There's the fact that people can come from all over the world to watch this. But as Stuart was saying, you as an author, there are people who can get up close to you who have been Rebus fans for decades, who get to meet the author and who can ask you questions and genuinely, and I'm a crime writing fan, it's thrilling. And this is an amazing event, but it's that physical contact that sometimes that's important, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there are pros and cons. Just to take up Stuart's point about the Edinburgh Book Festival, it's not moving because it's cheaper to be elsewhere. There's a lot of reasons why it had to move out of Charlotte Square.
Yeah. Well, I'm not.
The constant degradation of the grass being one of them, and the fact that a lot of the landowners weren't happy about it, so it was going to have to move. And the Art College is a temporary base, but it is going to be a physical festival. It's always going to be a physical festival. But as they learned last year from doing it all online, it does open up possibilities. It's more egalitarian. People can watch from all over the world, as you've suggested. They don't have the expense of having to pay to see events and having to pay to stay in a B&B or an Airbnb or whatever, and to get the train or the plane or whatever to get to the actual festival. But they do miss that. They do miss the actual being in a room and the thrill of it. And also, if everybody can watch everything, nothing is special anymore. It's a bit like the end of The Incredibles. If everybody's a superhero, nobody's a superhero. And you miss that, because when people are at an actual live event, they're hearing something that isn't going to be repeated anywhere else. It's actually happening. But, all this stuff gets videotaped and eventually goes out on YouTube and stuff, and people pick up snatches of it and put it here, there, and everywhere. And everybody hears all your stories all the time. And then you've got nothing left to tell to the next audience. And also, I mean, and a completely venal, and of course, Stuart wouldn't say this because he's not venal, but I am. We're not selling books. We don't sell books in the way we would if we were sitting at a table after an event at a physical festival, dedicating books to fans and getting to meet the fans face to face. We lose all of that.
Can I just put one thing on the record here? I'm definitely not saying that Edinburgh moved from Charlotte Square because it was cheaper, just because obviously they could not put it on, given that we are all in lockdown and there is a horrible virus on the street. So I'm not suggesting that it's just a cost-cutting exercise.
Go back and look at the tapes. That's exactly what he said. It's on the tape.
But
I'm sure we can edit that.
I would also say, extending on from what Ian was just saying, one thing that's really different doing events like this is that if Ian and I were in front of a live audience, as we usually are, we would be playing for laughs a hell of a lot more. This would be a much funnier event because we would be getting that feedback. Whereas it's been really quite a serious thing since we started, and that would never be the way we would do that.
We blame the chair for the fact it's not funnier. It should be funnier.
Cheers to that. But it is a bizarre circumstance. I mean, as a journalist and broadcaster, this is our new normal. So most of the time we're interviewing people on Zoom, and sometimes in very, very sensitive subjects. And that's really hard if you can't see people's body language. I mean, we get that. So normally we would be sitting on a sofa, in the lemon tree, and you could see when someone's picking up their cue. You could look at someone in the audience, and it's a really strange new normal that we're all working in.
I mean, I do think that during the pandemic, publishers, writers, bookshops, and literary festivals, adapted very quickly and adapted well.
Yes. Very much so.
We indie bookshops, they were cycling. We're getting the bicycle, and they would bicycle the book to you if you'd ordered it from them. Or they were opening their doors and you could go along and pick it up at the door. Publishers made sure that books were still getting published. Readers were desperate for books. Book sales actually seemed to go up during the pandemic. And the threat that Amazon was going to take over everything, which was a very real threat, didn't quite come to pass because the booksellers and the publishers and the readers didn't let it happen. Readers suddenly decided they wanted to hang on to their wee indie bookshop in their town, in their main street, and they were determined not to have it go to the wall. And so there was more support. And I saw it with lots of industries. I saw it with restaurants and people, buying vouchers for their favorite restaurants just so they would have some income. When restaurants started to do takeaway food, people going in droves to get takeaway food from the restaurant just to keep it above the waterline. It was a victory for the community. We saw it as a community thing, and it was a really positive thing about the pandemic, was that coming together like that.
Listen, guys, I've got questions coming in, so I'm going to loads of them. So I'm going to try and get through some of them. Serena said, "Are you being drawn to write about murders aided or triggered by a lockdown type of environment?" Stuart, do you want to take that one first of all?
No.
Okay.
That was nice and simple.
Do you want to expand on that?
No.
So that does that not appeal?
Let me tell you, early on in the first lockdown, when you were allowed to go out for an hour's exercise a day, my wife and I got our bicycles out for the first time in like 20 years and cycled down to Princess Street, because we thought we'll never get the chance again to cycle along a completely empty Princess Street at 5 p.m. on a Friday evening. And it was literally completely empty. And as I was cycling along, looking at all the boarded up windows of the 5-star hotels, I was thinking it would be a really phenomenal setting for a story. It would be.
And a movie.
Imagine a kind of heist type thing happening, jewelers shops, hotels, whatever it happens to be, people just doing a heist. But I think, as Stuart has kind of suggested with his answer, I'm not sure there's going to be an audience. I'm not sure people are really going to want to read about the pandemic for a while. And also, I think crime fiction is at its best if it's dealing with something momentous events. It's at its best when the dust has settled. And I would give as evidence of that the Troubles in Northern Ireland. During the Troubles, almost no crime fiction coming out of Northern Ireland. When the Troubles settled down a bit, suddenly an explosion, of crime fiction to try and explain what we've just come out of.
And the same thing is exactly true with crime
fiction
in South Africa.
It's too soon then. We're almost like, is it like a collective trauma, or is it just too soon to be writing about this?
Tell us about Africa, Stuart.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Well, I was just backing up your point. It's exactly the same thing. It seems to be that when society lives under the threat of actual real violence all the time, it's too close to it to start writing crime fiction that explores it.
Leslie in Aberdeen says, I'm sorry.
No, you go on.
This is the thing about being in the same room. Leslie in Aberdeen says, are settings in place as important as character and plot for police procedurals? If yes, in what ways, Stuart? Settings in place.
And not just police procedurals, all fiction. If you think of fiction as being a stool, it has to have the legs all at the same length.
If
not,
that kind of
it wobbles. Yeah. Well, it depends what kind of books you write.
Stuart,
we can both think of several books that would definitely class as that kind of stool. But everything has to be balanced. If it's all about dialogue, and then that leg is too long and you lose out on place and setting and character and plot. If it's all about plot, then you miss out on character and places. It's a balancing act. All fiction is a balancing act.
Ian,
everything deserves the same amount of focus.
The thing I love about crime fiction is that the setting becomes almost a character in itself. I think
it's true. I mean, if I want to learn about a culture, a city, a place and its people, I will always go to the crime fiction that's set there, because it will almost be like a gazetteer. It will give me a history of the place, something about its culture and its art and its history, the food, the drink, the people, their philosophy of life, their politics, the kind of society they live in, the problems they've got. All of that I will get from one slim crime novel in a way that I wouldn't get from any other kind of fiction. So as Stuart said, why would you want to read anything else? It is the complete package. It can be escapist, it can be confrontational, it can be political, it can be apolitical, it can be historical, it can be ahistorical. It can be anything you want it to be. If there's any kind of book you want to read, there will be a crime book out there that will satisfy that need.
Ian, just come in from Doug in Toronto, actually. Do you have an end in mind for Rebus? No need to give any details. Is he mortal after all?
Oh, he's mortal. In my mind, he's mortal. Whether I'm able to write about his death, I don't know. And as we know, no detective worth their salt in fiction is actually as mortal as the author who created them. So we're still getting Sherlock Holmes stories, we're still getting Miss Marple stories, Poirot stories, you name it. Detective stories are still being written about these people, even though the originators are long dead. We're still getting James Bond movies long after the creator died. So it might not be up to us. It might not be up to the likes of Stuart and me as to whether our creations keep going or not after we're. And even if they die, you can bring them back to life. So I could write a novel in which Rebus dies, and someone could blithely bring him back to life.
Interesting, because you touched on it. I was going to ask you about this, Ian, because you're writing another detective book, finishing the manuscript written, of course, by William McIlvenney, the kind of godfather of Tartan Noir. How did that come about?
Oh, geez. I'll try and keep it quick. I mean, just towards the end of writing Song for the Dark Times, so it was April, May of Lockdown 1, I was approached by Canongate Books. They said, look, Willie McIlvanney's widow, Siobhan, has given us some notes and scenes that he'd written towards a book he was planning to write, but he never quite got around to it before he died. Will you look at it? And I said, well, I'll take a look. So I looked. It was an extraordinary thing to get 100 pages of her typing of his handwritten notes. And it was very moving and very powerful. It wasn't just plot and it wasn't just character. It was also his insights and how he was feeling at the time and politics and this, that, and the other. And I said to Canongate, I said, yeah, you could get a book out of this or a novella. You could get something out of it if you did X, Y, or Z and you had this happen and that happen. And they came back to me and said, well, Siobhan would like you to do it. And I thought, I mean, it was a huge responsibility. But I was a complete fanboy when it came to Willie McIlvanney. He was a vast influence on Rebus and on me. So I wanted to, I thought, well, I'll give it a go and I'll see how I get on. And it was very important to me that it be Willie's voice and Willie's characters and Willie's Glasgow that people were reading. They weren't reading Ian Rankin's take on it. So I read and reread his books, and I did my background reading because the book is set in 1972 Glasgow. I was 12 years old and grown up in Cardenden and Fife, so Glasgow was an unknown quantity to me. And it was a prequel. So it was like, one of Laidlaw's first cases. But I did it to the best of my abilities, and Canongate showed it to Siobhan, and she wrote me the loveliest handwritten letter saying she could hear his voice throughout, and it was as if he was in the room with her. And I just thought, well done.
Will you do more?
That was as much as I wanted. And hopefully it will introduce a new generation of readers to the delights and the power of William McIlvanney. And
will you write more?
No.
Okay. It's done.
Although it was
How did you
have to write about, CCTV and mobile phones. It was lovely not to take on any of that.
Oh, I can only imagine. Stuart, Vicky's asking in Aberdeen, how do you get the violence and the murders out of your head after writing it all day?
Well, I'm just making this stuff up, so I'm not actually. It's not actually
you
to me. No, and I think Val McDermott also says that when we write these scenes, we will. It can take me 3-4 days to get it just right, so that the words are perfect and the sentences are structured the way that I want them to, so that they convey the meaning that I want and that they make the reader feel the way I want the reader to feel. You could read that. You could read that section in 10-15 minutes. So the experience for the reader and the writer are very, very different things. For me, it's about how do I get you to feel these things. Hopefully for you, it's woo.
And Steve is asking, would Logan and Rebus work together? Nice question. Stuart?
I think Rebus would worry Logan an awful lot, and I think Logan would probably bug the living hell out of Rebus, but not as much as Tufty would. I think that would come to blows at some point.
Ian, could they work together?
Okay, it's one of these conversations that crime writers always have when they're drunk in the bar at crime writing festivals. I'm always saying it would be great if my guy and your guy got together and did a case, and then in the cold light of day the next day over our kind of slightly greasy fried breakfast in the hotel, we say, wouldn't that be stupid? What a stupid idea that would be.
Don't you miss those greasy fried breakfasts?
I mean, how do you divvy up the work? How do you divvy up the work? I did a short story once for a collection of short stories that coupled crime writers, And I had to have Rebus work with Roy Grace, Peter James.
Oh, wow.
Set in Brighton. So our first problem was,
Oh.
how the hell does an Edinburgh cop and a Brighton cop end up working together? That was problem one. And once we'd solved that, it was actually fairly straightforward, but that was tough enough.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's one of these things that sounds great. It's like crossovers, Marvel and DC universe. No, this stuff should be, these characters, no.
No, just no. And Barbara's asking, do you watch any Nordic noir box sets? What's your favourite and why? Because always, people always have that conversation about the similarities between Scandinavian noir and Tartan Noir. Stuart, Nordic box sets, do you have time? Are you doing?
No, not really something that floats my boat, to be honest.
Do you read Scandinavian Noir?
I do some, but when it comes to television, I prefer my television crime to have a little bit more wit to it. And I know that in Scotland, Tartan Noir has a lot of wit.
Black humour, yeah. Ian, are you a Scandinavian Noir fan?
I very seldom watch television, and during the lockdown, my wife and I did start to watch binge watch stuff. So we did, we did Last Tango in Halifax, which is not crime, it was lovely. We then went to Broadchurch. I'd never watched Broadchurch. So we did season 1. And
what did you think?
It was okay. I thought the ending was ridiculous. It was like they just decided, it's you did it. And because of that, I didn't watch any other seasons. Then we turned to The Bridge, which again, I thought was fine, a wee bit far-fetched. And then at the end, I thought, this is completely ridiculous. And I didn't bother watching seasons 2 onwards. And then we've now turned to Call My Agent, 10%, which is about French TV and film agents, which is a lot of fun. So we're doing a lot of binging, but not much in the way of Scandinavian Noir. And yeah, what Scandinavian Noir did, and it is changing very quickly. But if you're talking about the Jo Nesbø style Scandinavian Noir, what it did was take it plucked all the kind of most rococo elements of people like Thomas Harris with Hannibal Lecter as your serial killer style, and big Hollywood blockbuster films, and then sort of put them in a blender with a bit of Scandi bleakness and snow, to create something that was kind of hyper ultra not realized. It wasn't very realistic. There's one scene in a Harry Hole book where he has his throat slashed, would you believe? He has his throat cut. Mm-hmm. So he runs back to his hotel room and gets a sewing kit and sews himself back together again. And I thought, if that was Rebus, he would go to hospital. If that was anybody, they would go to hospital. And that was the point where I thought, no, come on. And also, if you're a serial killer who wants to succeed, don't plant snowmen outside the victims' houses as clues, because you'll get away with it for a lot longer. But I do think the kind of younger generation of Scandinavian crime writers who are coming along, a lot of them published by Arenda Books, a fantastic indie publisher in England, from all over, from Iceland and here, there and everywhere. They're writing books that are possibly more domestic, they're more realistic, they're quieter, more like the kind of Maigret novels in some cases than a big Hollywood blockbuster, and I think all the better for it.
It's interesting. You talked about younger writers there. The thing that's always struck me about crime writers, and I've done loads of literature events with different genres of writers, is I think crime writers are very generous in terms of supporting younger writers and writers coming into the industry or whatever it says. So I don't know. It's a sense of that there's enough readers to go around.
I worked my socks off to try and stop Stuart getting published.
Well, to be honest, he's never said a nice word about any of my books.
Apart from you two, I think you're being a bit modest there. I think you're very supportive of writers coming into the genre.
Unless they're writing about
you are.
Obviously, yeah. No, I mean, I do. Yeah, it's a small world. It's a very small world, and I think you're right. There's a slight. It's not a chip on the shoulder, but the fact that for a long time crime writers were not invited to the literary festivals.
Why though? Why?
And weren't getting listed for the big prizes, I think made us think, right, we'll have our own festivals, we'll have our own prizes, we'll have things like the Dagger Awards, and we'll have the Harrogate Crime Festival of Granite Noir, we'll have Bloody Scotland. Because we weren't getting the invites.
And was that a literally snobbery then? Was that snobbery?
Of course it is. Of course it's snobbery. We just weren't writing literature. We were jobbing authors. We were doing a book a year. You cannot be writing a book a year and be writing serious literary fiction. Discuss, Stuart.
Stuart.
Utter toad bags. But you might as well say you cannot write a book that's 326 pages long and call it serious crime fiction. It has to be at least 500 pages. And that's the same distinction. It doesn't matter how long the book is. It doesn't matter how long it takes you to write it. It depends whether or not it is a good story told well. And it connects with the reader.
Was there that element of snobbery then? Because to be fair, if you look at the best-selling books now, I would say the top 5 out of 10 are crime novels.
That makes it even worse. It makes it even worse.
That sense of envy, perhaps.
Not only do we write rubbish, and not only do we not take long enough over the rubbish that we write, people like it and buy it in their droves, which means it cannot be worth anything.
And they can't get enough of it.
Well, clearly they're wrong. It's the people whose books aren't selling, who are slaving away for 10 years to produce something that doesn't know what a flipping quotation mark or comma, full stop, or any punctuation is. Those are the worthy novels.
The final ignominy, of course, is that if you write a book that is acceptable to the literary critics, you've broken the genre, you've transcended the genre. And that's, I mean, if someone ever says to me, Ian, you've transcended the genre, I'm going to shoot myself in the head.
You'd be much better off shooting them.
Question from Jeff.
Save the world.
Question from Jeff. Fitting humour into a gritty police procedural seems hard. I'm interested in whether the authors see much scope for humour in their writing. See, I think you guys fit a lot of humour.
Stuart's all about the laughs.
He's all about the laughs.
No, to be honest, when I started writing crime fiction, I based the police officers on... I've worked in teams my entire life. So I just based the police officers on the way that the teams I had worked in interacted. And that's how police officers are. They are just people who work in teams with other people. They make fun of each other. That's one of the great joys of working in a team, is making other members of the team laugh by poking fun at somebody who's just done something stupid.
But there's always that black humour, though. But there's that black humour exists in most parts of life, isn't there?
But there's I think there's an extra dimension to it. I mean, the police, because of the nature of the job they do, the very black humour is an escape valve. It's a way of not putting a gun in your mouth, really. I've spoken to cops who were at Dunblane or Lockerbie, and they kind of cringe because there are certain ridiculous things that happened that they laugh at, and they kind of feel embarrassed with the fact they're laughing at it. But it was an escape valve at the time, and if they hadn't laughed, they would be screaming into the void.
It's also a team bonding way as well.
Sorry, Stuart?
It's also a way of bonding as a team. I mean, they spend 90% of their time dealing with 10% of the population, and that 10% of the population absolutely hate them because they have put Uncle Timmy away, or they're doing you for shoplifting or breaking into somebody's house or battering somebody, and it is just as Ian said, it's a release valve, not just for the horrible things that they see, but the fact that they're under attack and under pressure an awful lot of the time as well.
Stuart, this one's for you. Charlene from Belfast. Good evening, Belfast. How do you get inspiration for your characters? You touched on it, I suppose, with teamwork, but where do your characters come from?
They come from all over. One of the things that I really, really hate about the lockdown is that I used to spend a lot of time wandering up and down the aisles in the supermarket, listening to people's conversations and stealing little snippets of dialogue, or the way that somebody moves, or the way that they dress. And obviously we're a lot more isolated now than that. But that's where a lot of people come from. A lot of my characters come from the supermarket.
Mel from Bolton. Hello, Bolton. Crime fiction is the most popular genre, but why do you think this isn't reflected on literary prize lists? I suppose we've touched on that, haven't we? Is it kind of I don't know, how would you describe it, the kind of snobbery?
I think things are definitely changing. Things are definitely changing in the UK as elsewhere. You're starting to get crime novels at least long listed for the Booker Prize, if not shortlisted. You're starting to get serious writers who are writing crime fiction. Young writers who at one time would probably want to be thought of as literary novelists actually turning to the crime novel because that's what they want to write, really. And crime fiction starting to be taught in universities, colleges, and high schools. So we're actually, Stuart and I are in a pretty privileged position because A, we sell lots of books, and B, we are starting to get taken more seriously than some other genres. Science fiction and fantasy, and Stuart will know this better than me almost, science fiction, fantasy, historical fiction, women's fiction, romantic fiction. There's a lot of genres out there who still aren't taken seriously. And crime fiction is beginning to be taken much more seriously. I mean, there's hardly a month passes without somebody doing a PhD on Tartan Noir, the Scottish novel, the politics of the Scottish crime novel, the characters, the this, that, and the other. I'm sure. Stuart, have you got a few stories about that? Make him funny, pal. Make him funny.
Oh well, yeah. Well, I'm going to be serious instead. I think one of the reasons that crime fiction is beginning to be taken a lot more seriously at these kind of prize giving things is that we are seeing crime writers on the judging panel, whereas previously it was always people who write literary fiction. And if you write literary fiction and you're judging a prize for what's going to be the best book, you're not going to pick a women's fiction or historical fiction. You're going to pick the books that are written by people who write the same kind of books that you do. There's never been diversity in that judging panel, and we're starting to see that more. I think there's space for more of that to come as well.
Stuart, Simon's asked, do you keep a list of potential plot lines in reserve for future books or just start afresh each time?
Well, you can't see it because I've obviously got my cat up in the background here. But I have a whiteboard just over here that is absolutely festooned with post-it notes of little snippets of dialogue and little things that I think might make interesting stories at some point in the future. And every now and again, I will pull one off and go, oh, I know what that means now. And I will start up. So yeah, I have a huge backlog of things I would like to write about, and new stuff gets added all the time. And I will never, ever work my way through all the ideas I would like to write about. I know Ian has a folder though.
Ian, you have a folder?
It's sitting right here. It's just sitting over here. It's like a ledger box thing that's full of. It's not, it's just ideas for things and scraps of paper and cuttings from newspapers and magazines. I don't, as I sit here tonight, I don't really, I've got a vague idea what my next book might be about, but the book after that, no. So I don't think that far in advance. And a lot of it is panic. With A Song for the Dark Times, it was, I've got a deadline. Get into the big folder of ideas and see what's in there. And there were some cuttings from newspapers down the ages about internment camps in Scotland in World War II. And that was it. That was the light bulb moment. I thought, well, I might be able to use this historical thing to say something about the way I think the world is in 2019.
And Ian, in terms of writing style, and this fascinates me how crime writers write, and Lynn Anderson just starts her story and just goes where the character goes. Val McDermott's very structured. You have your ideas, you've got your folder. Do you have simply a beginning, middle, end? Do you know where it's going to end when you start writing?
No, I'm a pantser. There are planners and pantsers, and I'm definitely a pantser.
So, pantser?
Yeah, pantser. You fly by the seat of your pants.
Nice, I like that.
I do not know when I start the book where it's going to go, who the killer is, or why they did it. I've got a theme I want to investigate. I've got a plot that allows me to investigate that theme. And no, in this last book, there were so many things where I didn't know what was going on. I just thought, well, this could be quite interesting. So let's see if the book thinks it's interesting, and maybe the book knows. And in a weird kind of mystical way, not to get too Yoko Ono, happy birthday, Yoko, not to get too Yoko about it, in a mystical way, the book knows where it wants to go, even if the author doesn't.
Stuart, this one's for you. Mark says, if you could have any other author's main character, who would you have and how could you improve them? Don't say Rebus.
To be honest, I wouldn't. It's the same.
Sunset Song, surely you could improve on.
It's the. I don't know. It's obviously it's very. It's kind of incesty, isn't it, really? I think Game of Thrones does it quite sufficiently. No, but it's like the question, you know, if you could have written a book, which book would you want to have written? There isn't one. I would never have wanted to write somebody else's book, because if I had written it, I wouldn't be able to enjoy reading it. I wouldn't want to steal Rebus, because I like to read Ian's writing about Rebus. And I was given the opportunity to, shall we say, reinvigorate a certain character that I'm not going to mention because I turned it down. And it's all because I enjoyed the books. I don't think I could do better than the person who.
Could you give us a clue? Could we have a clue where you're in safe company?
Nope.
Intriguing. And this is the point where, if we were at Granite Noir, we'd go to the bar at the Lemon Tree and you'd start to give us hints after a couple of Granite Noir beers. So I'm not going to. We've got a couple of minutes left.
I can't believe that he was offered McIlvanney before me.
Well, yeah, I just wasn't arrogant enough to think I would take it on.
That's devastating to me.
I am joking. I am joking.
I'm not
McIlvanney.
I'm not going to ask you what you're doing next, because that's kind of that's the obvious question. What I'm going to ask you is,
I think my publisher's asked me to do a Rebus novel. That's what's happening.
Yeah, Ash Henderson. What is the first thing you want to do when lockdown eases? What are you looking forward to, Ian?
I'm going to walk into the Oxford bar and buy everybody a pint. Everybody. I walk past that pub probably on a monthly basis. I walk past that pub. On my 60th birthday last April, during lockdown, my 1 hour of permitted outdoor exercise, I put a glass and a can of beer in my pocket, walked to the Oxford bar and stood outside the locked bar and poured myself a pint and drank it. I miss that place like the devil. And so that's the first thing I'm looking forward to. Just getting back. We said this at the start, writers need material, and material tends to come from mixing with other people, going out into the world, seeing what people are doing, listening to them talk, stealing their souls. And we're not able to steal their souls if we are stuck in our own little worlds. So we need the world to reopen so that Stuart and I can go out and start
steal souls
out of their bodies again.
Stuart, what are you looking forward to when lockdown eases?
Oh, well, when lockdown eases, we will be going up and buying some fish. When we're all vaccinated and everything is safe again, we will definitely be going down to Aberdeen, going to the Manchurian. We always call it the Mancunian.
The Chinese restaurant at the Chinese supermarket.
They don't talk like that. And we will have a massive blowout dim sum lunch. And we will eat with friends and just
Wouldn't that be amazing? I've got to say, the supermarket is still open there as an essential shop.
In Dundee.
Sorry? Oh, the little sushi place.
It's an amazing restaurant.
Yeah, that was nice, wasn't it?
That was Chinese.
Well, we can.
No, that was Japanese.
What was Japanese?
Yeah. You don't remember the sushi? There was a lot of wine consumed.
Oh.
There was a lot of everything consumed on it.
It was a good night.
And souls sucked or souls stolen.
I woke up 3 days later in Singapore with a tattoo and a beard.
Oh, fantastic! What a night out that is! It's like a newsroom night out. Anyway, guys, I'm conscious that we've gone slightly over time. I'm looking forward to being in Granite Noir next year, hopefully in the Lemon Tree and other venues. I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you who are sitting there on your sofas. Thank you for joining our chat. A massive thank you to Ian and Stuart, and also to all the organisers at Aberdeen Performing Arts who put on an incredible festival, which is on over the weekend. I'm just going to read this stuff out because I need to do that, because the Granite Noir book partnership is Waterstones. You can buy the books on their website. Do go to that. But there's an enormous amount of stuff on over the weekend that you're going to love. If you're crime fans, and even if you're not, it's an amazing event. So go online, visit the website, and book yourself in for some other sessions. I just want to say a huge thank you to Stuart and Ian for being part of tonight's chat. There's loads of stuff on. Have a very safe and relaxed weekend. I do hope you're having one of these on the sofa, and join the rest of the events. Keep reading, keep enjoying, and hopefully we'll be in the same room next year. I look forward to that. Thank you and good night.